Hi Keighley, thanks for the footage. And what I'd like to do before I go into um, the things that I'd like you to work on is just run through some key alignments with you as they relate to the system and the model as per your request. Don't panic with all the lines and the dots. They'll become very apparent as we go through the system or as we go through the swing and map some things out for you. Some of them you'll be straight away probably familiar with, like the red and the yellow plane lines down the line. The plane, when viewed from above, can be put down on the mat, so that's the two sort of arcs for the hand path, etc. It's ever changing, but it gives you a general idea that the hands and the club are swinging in an arc on a tilted angle both sides of the golf ball. Just as some references, the two lines that I've got down there, the yellow and the red, are very relevant to you during your backswing. So like I said, all these dots and lines will become very clear as we progress through this. Once I've done that, I'll give you some sort of relatively straightforward drills. I think when I look at your swing as a whole, what it needs is some organisation, as we say. So just making sure that some of the moves you make match up with some of the tendencies that you've got. So not everybody's swing is going to be the same. So it brings me to point one. You've got a relatively strong grip. That's not a problem. It does mean, however, that you've got to move a certain way through impact and certainly control the closure of the club face through the ball, which I'll come to, where you may struggle with that. You talk in your email about toe strikes. You used to have quite a lot of movement to the left. So these all fit in. So I'm trying to just organise your swing a little bit so that when you practice, you're working on more appropriate pieces. The actual body of work itself won't be too complicated for you at all because you've got a relatively solid golf swing throughout. There's just a couple of key areas that we need to highlight. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move through the swing with you. We're going to look first of all from P1 at setup to P2 when the shaft's parallel with the ground during the takeaway. So the first thing we see from down the line is that the club tends to, now the camera angle can throw this out sometimes, but your club does tend to take quite a direct route back from the ball. Within the model, you would like to see the hands tracing the red line, which is the hand path or the hand plane, from P1 to P2, before gradually elevating onto the yellow line, which is elbow plane, from P2, 2.5 to 3. So when the hands go out a little bit, or certainly don't come in enough from P1 to P2, what that tends to mean is that the elbows are slightly too level and the tilt in the shoulders is not quite enough at this point. When you look at that from face on, pretty good setup, strong grip that we've mentioned, the trajectory of the lead shoulder. So one of the key sort of phrases we use in stack and tilt is shoulder down. And you can see there that your shoulder does go down, but it doesn't quite go down as much as we'd like to see it. Having said that, you make a relatively stable move away from the golf ball initially. So P1 to P2, I would be looking to have the hands work in a little bit more so that they are working up this red line rather than where we see them now. So a good little checkpoint for that is at P2. When the shaft's parallel with the ground, you'd expect to see the hands over the top of the stance line. In order to do that, you find that the knees have got to change flex a little bit more. The pelvis has got to be a little bit more active, and that's going to encourage the shoulder to work down and across a little bit more rather than the relatively level shoulder turn that we get early in the swing. And that has a knock-on effect as you go further into your swing. The hands there, I'm just going to get rid of those red lines that I've added. So as you go further into your swing and you go from P2 to P3, again, relatively dominated by the arms, not a great deal of body movement at that point. You're going to see the hands elevate onto the yellow line. Now, at this point, the lead arm, for my liking, is not in enough. I would expect to see the hands, if they were in more at P2, they would be in more at P3, and we would have the shaft hitting the sort of base of the bicep at P3. So already the shaft and hands are a little bit too elevated. Again, body's not really activated enough, early enough, so this is a sequencing thing. The drill I'm going to give you is very straightforward, but it's going to encourage a lot of this. I just want to give you an insight into where you are in relation to the model and the system. So there's some sort of keys at P3. Once you're in that position at P3, you're going to tend to have to lift to the top because of the alignment of the elbows at P2. What you're going to find is there's going to be a lift. You're going to see the elbow raise off the side, which is the green arrow here, and that's what pushes the club across the line. From face on, a little bit extra arm swing. Body sort of tilts towards the target, just ever so slightly. That's sort of in anticipation of what you're about to do in the transition, to be fair. Upper centre, lower centre, starting to side bend to the left, which is great. So again, not a lot wrong at this point from face on. We're relatively stable. The spine's changed flex. The knees have changed flex. We're turning on a tilted angle. The sequence of it's not great or not ideal, but you're still sort of ticking a lot of the boxes that you need to. Now, when you lift and the elbow moves away from the side like you've got it, that's fine if you can then relocate it and get this club to sort of drop back and shallow. Now, unfortunately, you don't do that. So what's going to happen now is you're going to go from across the line into a relatively steep position at P5. You see where the white arrow is. Now, again, P5, we'd expect to see the shaft on the mid bicep. So again, hands in more at P2, hands and arms in more at P3, less lifting of the arms at P4. Means that P5, everything's going to be in a little bit more. So the hands would be sort of, the hands aren't actually in a bad position, but they would be in a different condition, and that would shallow out the pitch of the shaft at P5. When we look at it from face on, we see that the both centres move forward. Now, ideally here, we would have the lower centre moving forward whilst rotating. Don't forget that bit. And that would change the side bend that's to the target into a side bend that's away from the target. Now again, that's a big piece in regards to shallowing out the position you see down the line at P5. Now in your case, both centres, which are leaning, the differential is towards the target, both move forward. You can see your head in relation to the purple line. So we both move forward. So at this point, we're setting ourselves up for quite a steep angle of attack into the golf ball. Now, what you're able to do is you are now able to, just get rid of that. You are now able to pull away quickly with the chest. You see your head come off the wall. The heel starts to raise. So you start to extend to prevent the club from tumbling out in front of you. The problem with that is it causes a severe raising of the handle, which increases or makes it easier for you to close the club face. Now, when you have a strong grip, the last thing you want to do is introduce the roll on the club like you see here in the two red circles. So there's a little bit of a rescue job from P5 to sort of P7.5, and then what you're looking at down the line is just a sort of a continuation of that process. So ideally what we need to do with yourself is we need to get the hands in more at P2, which will have the shoulder working down more from face on, which will have everything deeper at P3, which will make it look like the body's more active and the arms are doing less when viewed from face on. You will be much less across the line at P4. which will then allow you to be in a better position at P5 without having to actively externally rotate and rescue it as you transition. So not many people are good at doing that, even though it's something that's talked about a great deal online. Some players do it, make it work. The vast majority of players don't have the mobility to do that. And we need that upper centre stabilising in transition. So we should have a fixed or stable upper centre with a lower centre that's moving forward. And then from there, we want to start calming down the rolling aspect of the swing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get your down the line view up against a model swing just to give you some visual references at P2, P3, P4, P5, and then I'm going to give you the drill that I'd like you to work on. Okay, so here we have yourself against Charlie Wee. I'm just going to go through the checkpoints that we mentioned. One little thing that I didn't touch on, apologies for that, is, and I haven't got a major issue with this, but your shaft tends to sit slightly above the level of the belt. A player with a stronger grip would expect to, not always, but we would expect to see the handle a little bit lower. Now your baseline for the model is like we see here with Charlie, which is the shaft would be pointing at the belt line. Any lower is ideal for a cut, any higher is ideal for a draw. Now I haven't got an issue with your shaft sitting higher. However, with a strong grip and a little bit of roll, if the shaft sits too high, that can get a little bit colourful. So just pay attention to that a little bit. In lowering the shaft, you'd also find that your neck would come down a little bit, which is fine, and the shape of your spine should start to just soften up a little bit. So I would play around with just lowering the handle, lowering the chin, and that would take care of the posture for you. From there, we talked about P1 to P2, hands in, shoulder down. Hands in, shoulder down. In your case, the hands don't come in enough and the shoulder doesn't work down enough. Those two blend together nicely. So you can see a difference in your two swings at that point. Because the hands have come in more from P1 to P2 and the body's been more involved, at P3 the arms are much deeper and the shaft is hitting the base of the trail bicep. As he then approaches the top, the overall move here is very much all body, no arms, even though the arms are involved. It's not very armsy, it's more body orientated. You can see here that the elbow hasn't lifted off the side anywhere near as much as we see with yourself, which is a little bit less body and a little bit more arms. You squeeze this tighter, the club starts to realign itself, which means then when you transition, like in Charlie's case, you're just retracing your steps, so to speak. Shaft now at P5. Mid to just above mid bicep. Arm angled in about 20 degrees. Versus shaft through the shoulder, arm angled in maybe 10, 12 degrees. So the whole thing starts from P1 to P2, P2 to P3. When you get to P4, we want a little bit more pressure under the trail arm against the torso. One way of doing that is pop a head cover under this arm at the top of the bicep at setup and squeeze that all the way to the top. The drill that I'm going to give you, however, is going to encourage a little bit more of what you see with Charlie anyway, without really thinking too much about it. Move through the ball, very little rolling of the club. With yourself, just a little bit too much rolling. We've talked about the pulling away and the raising of the handle. Pull away too much, could get a toe strike. Raise the handle too much, we've now got a closing club face and a toe strike, and that ball's going off to the left. And you can see because of the pulling away with the chest, instead of exiting round about mid bicep again, we're exiting more through the level of the shoulder. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a short film of a drill that I was doing for someone during lockdown on an online lesson that I'd like you to spend some time doing over the next couple of weeks. Whilst doing the drill, I will forward you my mobile number and you can send me any footage you want across via WhatsApp so that we can just make sure that you're practicing it correctly in between sessions, so that way you can get as much benefit as you possibly can. Okay, so excuse the casual attire over on the left. Like I said, this was done during one of the days of lockdown for an online student, but it's a perfect example of the drill that I'd like you to do. So you're going to take your normal stance and set up. You see the handle a little bit lower, pointing a little bit more towards the line of the belt. What you're then going to do is you're going to draw the right foot back so that the toe end of the right foot is behind the heel of the lead foot. Now from there you've pushed or you've pulled back this trail pelvis, making it really easy to swing the club inwards, hands inwards, and work the shoulder down. So you don't need much thought during the backswing at this point. The only thought I'd like you to have is, if you want to put a head cover under the arm here, is to keep that squeeze on all the way to the top of your backswing. You can see that arm has not come away from the torso at all. Now that's a little bit exaggerated, but for you that's not a problem. And you can see as this lifts, this shaft goes across the line. So hands in, shoulder down, and then from there as you come through, I want you to feel like you're just going to keep the arms as straight as you can. So pull the right foot back, squeeze the right arm against the torso, trap a head cover under the top of the right arm. Take the club back, keeping that squeeze on. And then as you come through, keep the arms as straight as you can. And that's going to encourage you to stop a little bit quicker and turn a little bit more continuously through the ball whilst controlling the rate of closure. So it's a relatively straightforward drill, but it has a really positive impact. Now, any tendency that you have to pull away with the chest when you're doing this drill is going to seriously impact on your ability to strike the golf ball. So it starts to discourage other moves that you make without, again, you really thinking too much about it. So we've covered quite a lot of detail in there. Ultimately, the drill itself is quite simple. I'll forward you my mobile number via email, and as you're doing this and you're practicing in the net, feel free to drop me a little bit of footage and let's see and make sure that you're doing it correctly. Good luck with it. If you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch.